This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Marco Mueller, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 439 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Neal Pollack. He's the author of 11 books, including the memoirs Pothead and Alternadad, the novels Jubal and Downward Facing Death, and the essay collection, the Neal Pollack Anthology of American Literature. And we'll be speaking with him today about his humorous science fiction novels Repeat and Keep Mars Weird. And now here's our interview with Neal Pollack. All right, so we're here with Neal Pollack. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So first of all, how big of a fantasy and science fiction fan are you?
I would consider myself a fairly big fantasy and science fiction fan. I don't have a deep knowledge of the genre, but obviously, apparently, I was surprised when you emailed me because to do this because I have written a couple of sci-fi fantasy novels, but I don't really consider myself a sci-fi fantasy writer. And I wrote those 2 books that we're going to talk about during a period in my career where I was just kind of pumping out genre novels every 2 or 3 months. That said, I certainly watch a lot of sci-fi and fantasy. I read a fair amount of it. And, it was extremely fun to join those ranks.
Yeah, so I heard you say that you were a big Doctor Who fan growing up and you collected Fantastic Four, stuff like that.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I watched Doctor Who on PBS. I'm 50 years old, so when I was a kid, Doctor Who was available once a day on the local PBS station. Mostly the Tom Baker episodes, and close to when they were original. Maybe they were a year behind. I'm not exactly sure. And then maybe some of the ones before, some of the John Pertwee ones, earlier ones, and then around the Peter Davison era, I gave up because it was too bad even for a kid. I couldn't deal with it. And then I picked it up again when they rebooted it. I loved the Christopher Eccleston years, the David Tennant, and most of the Matt Smith. And then I kind of faded away from it again. I felt like it, I don't know, kind of turned into a romance novel to me. I kind of gave up on Doctor Who around the time where they made Rory an immortal Roman gladiator. I just didn't buy into that.
Yeah, but so are there any other science fiction things that have been big influences on you? Like in Repeat, you have the character go see Empire Strikes Back 60 times and stuff like that. Oh,
I mean, yeah, I've seen every Star Wars movie and many of the TV versions of it, and I have a fairly good deep knowledge of Star Trek. I don't know. I watched all of Game of Thrones. I've seen, pretty much anything with spaceships flying around, I'll go see. I grew, Star Wars came out when I was 7. So, that leaves a big imprint on you. You learn to sort of, to me, going to the movies means seeing spaceships flying around.
Yeah. And so you said, so the 2 novels that I read that we're going to talk about are Repeat and Keep Mars Weird.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of, I don't actually remember now how I came across your website, but, I've just kind of I just recently moved to Austin, so I've been kind of interested in writers in Austin. And so I was looking at your page and those books looked interesting. And I'm, as you might guess from the title of the show, I'm a big fan of humorous science fiction.
Right.
There's never enough of that. So, always excited.
Right. Right, and I certainly, I loved the Douglas Adams books when I was a kid. I devoured those, and I also loved the old PBS miniseries version of it, which to me remains. I guess the radio serial was really the best version, but as opposed to the movie with Martin Freeman and Mos Def, I consider the PBS version to be that's the canon for me.
Yeah, I mean, I have read the books, but my parents owned the the original BBC radio dramas when I was growing up, and we just listened to those over and over again. So I'm mostly a Hitchhiker's Guide fan from the radio dramas.
Sure.
But so you said, so kind of what, I guess, first of all, are Repeat and Keep Mars Weird, would you say those are the works of yours that would have the most appeal to science fiction fans?
Well, I mean, Keep Mars Weird is a straight up, sci-fi space opera political satire. So that one certainly, for people who like the genre, fits. Repeat is sort of a, how should you put it, like a time traveling romantic comedy, right? So I wouldn't call Repeat hard sci-fi or anything. It's one of those infinite time. I listened to your episode. You had the Infinite Time Loop movie episode recently, and I listened to that, and it kind of fits within that subgenre of sci-fi and fantasy.
Yeah, so in the book, it's sort of it's like Groundhog Day, except instead of reliving one day, the character is reliving the first 40 years of his life, and then on his the last night before his 40th birthday, he wakes up in the womb and relives 1970 to 2010 over and over again. Right.
That's the sort of the general premise, and he doesn't. And the way I played it was, he doesn't relive the exact same life over and over again. He kind of, it's like a choose your own adventure, right? He can do whatever he wants with that time, and it makes it hard when he's a kid, obviously, because he's under the control of his parents, and he also retains all the memories of his previous incarnations. So he starts coming out of the womb as a genius baby. Basically, he can already read and write and knows everything that's going to happen in politics and in culture, and it drives his parents crazy, and it makes him, a very frighteningly precocious kid. And so, like in the book, he just takes various paths, and none of them make him happy.
Do you remember how you first got the idea you wanted to write this book about a guy reliving his life over and over again?
I think that's just a fantasy that a lot of people have. And I turned 40, and when you turn 40, that's a time when people start to reckon with the choices they've made and the path they've taken, and they start wondering what would have happened if I'd chosen a different career, or if I married someone else, or if I had kids, or if I hadn't had kids. So I don't remember the exact moment, but it was just an idea that had been brewing in my head for a while.
And you said that you wrote it in 2 or 3 months?
Yeah, I tend to write pretty fast. So, the initial draft anyway, I for a book that's say between 50 and 70,000 words, which most of my books are, I tend to pump them out pretty quickly. I don't like to linger with my prose. I just kind of like to, get the scenes down and, land as many jokes as I can. And so I wouldn't say that I'm a very sort of careful writer.
Well, I thought both these books were really good, and they carried me along, and I laughed out loud more than I have reading anything for a long time, and I thought
thank you.
Had satisfying conclusions and everything. And I really when I was growing up, a lot of the books I read had been published in the 60s and 70s, and at that time, science fiction novels they all had to be 60,000 words long, and no longer. And I'm still not persuaded that there's really any reason for most books to be longer than about 60,000 words long. I think I say 75 is like your outer limits. I agree. Like I oftentimes by the final third of a book, I'm like, I'm ready for the next book, Yeah. And I feel like there's a lot of fat that could get edited out of books. And I think also like there's a lot of books that could stand for a more linear narrative. I try as best I can to go, A to B to C, and try not to, fart around with flashbacks or like,
multiple points of view. I just don't think like that. I think very straightforwardly, like you. Like I grew up reading books that were short and kind of punchy and fun. Yeah. And I try when I get around to writing a book, I try to do the same thing. That maybe some poor kid's going to stumble upon my work at the library, and it can help them kill an afternoon or something.
So the character in the book is named Brad Cohen. And in his various lives, he starts out in his first initial life, he's a failed screenwriter, and then he variously becomes a political pundit, a Jeopardy contestant, sort of a druggy hedonist, and kind of a seeker after enlightenment. Are those all the things that you would do if you could live your life over and over again?
Yeah, and they're also all things I have done in my one life. I was on Jeopardy. I have done some political punditry. Like Brad, I was an intern at the New Republic magazine in 1990. It was an annoying 91. I'm sorry, it was an annoying time and place, but it gave me a look into that culture and those types of people. I practice yoga, and I did a yoga teacher training. And so I've done a pretty deep dive into that. What was the other one you mentioned? The drugs. Yeah, I've done lots and lots of drugs. My most recent book, Pothead, is a memoir of my addiction to and recovery from marijuana, which I was a very heavy user of for most of my life, adult life anyway. So these are all. I guess these are all sort of aspects of my actual personality.
Yeah, I mean, I was noticing that you've just done an incredible number of things you mentioned. I mean, also, I had a couple other. You play competitive poker, do pub trivia.
Yes,
you were on the Daily Show. I mean, it's.
I was. I mean, being on the Daily Show was like a very fortunate kind of book publicity moment. It was not like something I do. I mean, I wish I could be on the Daily Show, or something, some kind of show. I like being on TV. It's fun and easy compared to other things that you have to do in life. So I've had, I've been blessed with some pretty amazing experiences.
Yeah. And you've written 11 books. I mean, it just seems you seem to have done a lot and be very productive.
Which is odd because I don't feel like I do anything. Especially like the last 7 months. It's like, do I do anything? Going to Costco is like a huge deal.
But so do you think if you were smoking so much marijuana, did that, like if you hadn't, would you have written like 22 books, or would it be pretty much the same thing?
I think it would be more or less the same number of books. I might have written one or two more. I mean, that 11 books all came in 20 years. So it's not like I started when I was age 2 and, but I think that I think my books probably would have had a lot less marijuana in them. The marijuana kind of there's a lot. Drugs were a huge priority for me, especially toward the end of my addiction there. When I'm getting ready to start production on another book, and I'm going to try to keep the drugs very low there. The main character doesn't do drugs. It's not going to be a major theme.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll come back to that, but I was curious, was there anything in Repeat that you considered having Brad do that you just decided not to, didn't have space for, or decided didn't fit in the book or whatever?
Not really. Like I said, I mean, I almost, I have improv training, right? I studied improv with Del Close in Chicago, the legendary Del Close, and I was in an improv troupe I worked as a newspaper reporter in Chicago, and I was in an improv troupe then, and I just kind of improvised the book in a way. So I didn't really there weren't any real discarded scenarios. There are of course lots of things I could have had the main character do. But the thing is I couldn't have had him become like a professional athlete or something, because those are certain things cannot be, you can't just do them because you want to, right? You have to have talent and physical ability. I suppose I could have had to become like a weightlifter or something. But so they were all just kind of these are mostly intellectual pursuits that he undertakes, right?
Yeah. I guess if you listen to our Time Loop episode, we were really getting into the nitty gritty of how would you actually what would the biology be of these memories coming back and everything? And that was
I don't know.
Making me wonder in this. Do you happen to know if a baby's, because I've heard that babies don't actually remember anything until they're X number of months old. Do you know if a baby somehow, if this were to happen, would a baby's brain biologically be able to hold an adult's memory?
That is a good question. I just know that I wanted to write a birth scene with someone aware of what was happening to them. I mean, that scene there's a kind of a gross out factor to that set piece where he's born again, literally born again. And then of course the comedy of like a person with an adult man's awareness having to breastfeed to survive. That scene was when people were reading this thing, in larger numbers. They're not, it came out many years ago now, so that scene actually grossed a lot of people out. the breastfeeding scene.
As I recall, I think Ray Bradbury actually claimed to be able to remember being in the womb. I don't know what to make of that exactly, but
he wasn't. He didn't go back to the womb.
yeah. Well, there's that. Yeah.
The womb. That's kind of like the like the movie with the James Franco made fun of. No, that's okay. Anyway,
well, there's the movie with Ashton Kutcher, The Butterfly Effect.
The Butterfly Effect. Yeah, look, I'm not. There's also a book which I found out after I published Repeat called Replay, which is like a British sci-fi novel from the 70s or 80s, which has a very similar premise. And I wasn't aware of that until after this came out. So this is a genre of book. It's not like no one has ever come up with this idea before. It's just kind of my take on it.
Yeah, but I think like the when he becomes a pundit, knowing ahead of time everything that's going to happen. I thought that was really, really gripping, and I'd never seen that specific scenario in any science fiction book before.
Sort of a like a wonk thriller.
Yeah.
Like he rises to power in Washington D.C. because he knows exactly who's going to win elections. I mean, that is a quite a skill.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're I don't know, if that just to me specifically that that sort of hits multiple interests of mine, but I really thought that was compelling.
Well, and again, like I have been a professional journalist. And I have, and I've worked, with those types of people. So, I kind of saw how venal it all is, how kind of pointless that the game is. And so I wanted to riff off of that a little bit.
I was curious because there's a part where the character who's lived life before and knows what's going to happen tells the people that Donald Trump could be president one day, and they say, no, that could never happen. That's ridiculous. And the book was published, I think, in 2015, so it must have been written earlier. Like, likely...
Trump was running, and I guess I just kind of, I took that whole situation seriously before other people did, or I don't know if I took it seriously, but I saw it developing. And I saw the way people were reacting to it. And I was like, I don't know, guys. This is America. This is a country. Wrestling's very popular here. And so is Donald Trump. And, the Democrats have a kind of a snot elitism problem. And I would watch it. Don't be so cocky.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And, I've been together with my girlfriend for 7 or 8 years. And she can... confirm this, but in that entire time I've never been anxious about anything that's going to happen, except twice. And once was I predicted COVID was going to be a big deal when everyone said it was nothing. And I also, in summer 2015, I predicted that Donald Trump had a good chance of becoming president when I hadn't heard anyone say anything other than it was a giant joke. So I think I got a pretty good track record there. Yeah,
well, good for you, for predicting those two, glorious events, right? I can't say I really saw COVID coming. It just kind of ran over me like a freight train. This whole situation. I mean, I'm as used to it now as I can be. But I'm actually going to write. I think my next book is going to be a sort of a dystopian future sci-fi post-COVID book, but not a dystopia like The Road or anything. Just sort of it's a little bit more like Keep Mars Weird in that sense.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely looking forward to that. So let's talk about Keep Mars Weird. So you want to say more about how that, like, do you remember how you got the idea for that?
Well, I live in Austin, like apparently you do as well, and welcome. There used to be live music here. I don't know if you were here in time for that, but
no, I haven't actually like really seen this. I mean, I actually lived in Austin for a year when I was just out of college, so like 20 years ago. But you know, we moved here because my girlfriend is doing an MFA at Texas State. But we moved here we sort of like moved here, like unpacked all our stuff, which took a couple months, and then we've been locked in our apartment ever since.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, there used to be stuff to do here, but I've lived here on and off for 20 years, and I have just sort of gradually watched it go from being a party town with a sort of a laid back, culture to being this fancy schmancy tech hub. And so, it's like watching, gentrification in real time, just like watching a lady's scuffed up shoes getting polished. Right. And so I found the whole marketing of that Bohemia and turning it into this sort of simulacrum of what it once was, I just found it ridiculous and also kind of hilarious. So, Keep Mars Weird is my, it's like it's a futuristic, sci-fi take on gentrification, basically. And the first part of the book takes place in Austin. I think is a couple hundred years in the future, where global warming has, decimated the United States and flooded the coasts and all that, and Austin has become this like coastal metropolis and the international center of commerce and culture, and this sort of gorgeous shining city on a hill, kind of a combination of like Sydney, Australia, and Austin itself, but and Shanghai, like it's like the ultimate city of the future, but where everybody is wealthy and everybody is successful and everybody is happy, but it's also kind of boring. So when young people are seeking that kind of bohemian adventure that young people do, specifically in this book, a couple of young men, they hop on a rocket and they go to space. And Mars has that sort of reputation of like old Austin, or like or 1970s New York, this sort of gritty bohemian party place.
Do you want to just explain the title, Keep Mars Weird?
Sure. Well, Austin has developed over the years this slogan, Keep Austin Weird, which was sort of cooked up by independent businesses when gentrification started to sort of and generic culture started to overwhelm the old funky Austin a little bit, but it was just developed. It was just like co-opted by the city government and like by corporate culture and by South by Southwest, which started off as like an indie rock festival, but really just kind of became a commercial for technology. And it was co-opted, and weirdness became something that was a corporate buzzword. So people could come down here and feel funky for a few days before flying back to their expensive condos or mansions or whatever. So in the book, Keep Mars Weird kind of serves that same function. Like the powers that be that run Mars use Keep Mars Weird as a marketing slogan to sort of like early Mars was kind of dirty and down home and funky and a little bit country, a little bit punk rock, and as the book starts, it's in sort of a mid stage gentrification situation.
Yeah, well, let me read this part. So this is one of the revolutionaries on Mars is describing how great Mars used to be.
Sure.
And he says, there were restaurants that stayed open all day and never had any customers, on purpose. You could sit in a ditch and play ukulele and someone would make a movie about you. We had a thing called Flying Tits Week where everyone would make these fake tit drones and fly them around. There was one guy who used to ride around naked on a unicycle and nobody cared. That's what Mars was all about. So is that sort of what Austin used to be like, or?
That is the imagined idea of what old Austinites think Austin used to be like, right? So, I mean, there was a lot of weird culture here. Don't get me wrong, like genuinely like strange bohemia, but it was all, it's in some ways it was also like none of that stuff actually sounds that appealing, right? That you just read about. It all sounds kind of gross and shitty. But it is true that like it did have sort of an authenticity about it. And the character that we're talking about there, the revolutionaries are complete drugged out idiots. They have no idea what they're doing. Their aims are kind of suspect in their own right, so they're not to be trusted either. But yeah, that's sort of a parody of like what like people who have been around a scene for a long time say when the scene used to be like that. Like I lived in Chicago for a long time, and Chicago, I've been back there, within the last year. It's like the last place I really visited before, traveling became something that you don't do anymore. And it was still plenty gritty, and but 20 years ago, everyone was like, man, the city's gotten so gentrified. There's no one's real anymore. There's nothing real to do. There's, the old vibe is gone. That's just a rap you hear constantly, no matter where you are.
Well, because, I was feeling pretty good about we moved from New York. And so moving to here, we were like, wow, now we're living in an apartment that's twice as big where the rent is half as much and all these other various, the weather's nice and all this various quality of life improvements. But then, reading your book was the first thing that made me think like, oh, wait, did we make a mistake coming here? Because it's kind of like, it's like the opposite of a love letter to Austin, it seems like.
I don't hate Austin. I mean, I have, I've lived here a long time and it's a generally relaxing place to live with good weather for the most part and good movie theaters, good music, good tacos. It's not like there's a lot worse places to sort of ride out the pandemic than Austin, Texas. But at the same time, let's not kid ourselves and think that like it's what it used to be, that it's not like it doesn't, 20, 25 years ago, it was super chill and small and easy to get around. That's just the way it is, and now you might be able to move back to New York and get your old apartment back for a lot cheaper because New York is sort of degentrifying in real time. These things move in cycles, but it's also like, why would you want to live there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so what do you think? I mean, because in the book, you make fun of like Mars by Mars and the Summit. Could you talk about like how those relate to the real Austin?
Sure. Well, those are parodies of South by Southwest, which, like I was saying before, is it's like a cultural festival. But like, when it started back in the late 80s, it was mid to late 80s. It was just a indie rock festival. It's just like people playing guitar in shitty bars. And then, gradually the industry kind of glommed onto it and became sort of slightly bigger profile bands playing in slightly nicer bars. But for, a good 15 years, it was just music. And then the tech industry got a hold of it and started turning it into this like networking platform. There's also a film festival attached to it, which is fine, except that when it was like small indie films, but then like you started having major Hollywood premieres, and then you had these you had HBO shows doing corporate activations to promote their new product, and Twitter got discovered here, and Twitter is like the source of all evil on the planet, and at that moment everything was evil about big tech sort of descended upon Austin and swallowed it whole. So you had this is the ultimate example of cultural co-optation.
So have you been involved at all with the South by Southwest, or did you just
Oh yeah, yeah,
go out
many
to
times. Yeah, I have a band. I've played at showcases at least a half dozen times. I've spoken at the tech conference. I've given readings from my books. In fact, I was scheduled to give a reading from Keep Mars Weird at South by Southwest the year it came out. And I mean, I did give a reading, but it happened to be opposite a keynote speech by Barack Obama. Which was announced later, but it happened to be scheduled literally at the exact same time as my reading. So my reading was attended by, a half a person. So, I have I have my history with South by Southwest, and, most people in Austin don't mind when you make fun of South by Southwest. It's part of living here, is making fun of it. Not everyone is like, marching in lockstep with the South by Southwest agenda, if there is one. And let's face it, the festival is like a major economic driver for the city. It was a tragedy when COVID-19 shut it down. A lot of people were thrown out of work. A lot of bands from around the world didn't get a chance to come show their wares, and it sucked. I missed it when it was gone. I'll be glad when I can go, wander around and listen to Japanese punk rock bands again.
What has been your experience with sort of the literary scene in Austin? Like, do you hang out with other writers, or like, are there events?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's not like New York where every other person you meet is a writer. So yeah, we all, most of us know one another. I mean, there aren't a ton of professional writers working in Austin. A lot of the ones who are here are, they're journalists or nonfiction writers. Most of the fiction people, like, your partner, come to get their MFA at UT or Texas State and linger around for a few years, give some readings, and then go somewhere else when they get a job. So there've been lots of people who have kind of floated through and floated away. And there are, there's a community of people who are permanent here, most of them associated with the universities. And I, know most of them. I wouldn't say that the scene is, booming, but there's stuff, but there's, the Texas Book Festival, when, we're allowed to leave the house, is a nice sort of marquee event, and a lot of writers come to town. And that's another thing too, is because of Book People and other, cultural institutions. Writers do come to town so you can see people. And, that's one of the things that's nice about Austin, is that it's, you get, most things that are good float through here one way or another. So there's, it's a great city to be a fan in.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm definitely looking forward to going to all that stuff someday.
Yeah, 2023 should be really good year for you.
Yeah. So Keep Mars Weird is published by Amazon's 47 North imprint.
Yes.
And you want to talk about what was your experience with that?
I was having trouble finding a publisher for my fiction in the 2010s. My previous novels had been published by corporate. Well, my first book was published by McSweeney's, and then I switched over to some corporate publishers, and they just weren't big sellers. So it was hard for me to find a home for my fiction. But I really wanted to write novels. I didn't want to just do memoirs. I've always wanted to be a novelist, and so I really wanted to pursue that. And I met a guy who. A high up executive at Amazon Publishing, and he offered me a deal to write a bunch of books for them, and I bid on it. And because the first one on that deal was a sort of a historical fiction, but with a little bit of fantasy in it, called Jubal, which is set in the world of Jewish basketball players in the 1930s. I self-published that, and then Amazon picked it up. And then I published a couple of detective novels set in the yoga world, and then Keep Mars Weird and Repeat. And I just kind of bounced around from Amazon label to Amazon label. And, the experience was good. I mean, they hired good editors to work with me, and, put clever covers on everything. And, I had no real problems, but I would say the one problem with publishing with Amazon, with putting out books through Amazon Publishing, is that they weren't in bookstores, right? So I had to sell it. All had to be sold through the website, and they sold quite a good number of copies. But because it was Amazon, it didn't get any bookstore play. It was hard to book events because independent bookstores that had previously been my bread and butter didn't want to work with Amazon, and it was hard to get press and reviews. So the books operated on in a separate publishing ecosystem where they sold as many as, if not more, copies than my previous books, but they were kind of invisible to the naked eye.
So how much of that is due to hostility toward Amazon as a company, and how much of it is just we're going to prioritize books from mainstream, from the big five publishing houses?
Oh, I think a lot of it has to do with hostility toward Amazon. I mean, while I wouldn't consider myself, I'm not a best-selling writer. My memoir Alternadad showed up on a few bestseller lists here and there for a couple of weeks, but my books have not been hugely commercially successful. But I was a fairly well-known writer. I mean, my early books were all reviewed in the New York Times, and I was on like you said, I was on the Daily Show, and I got press. And then the Amazon. Jubal got some press from sort of the Jewish media, but mostly it was crickets. And especially Keep Mars Weird and Repeat, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. So, I think it has a lot to do with Amazon. The independent bookstores when I would contact them to do events, they'd say, we refuse to work with Amazon in any way. So I imagine that the attitude toward my books from the press would be the same. I mean, to be fair, most books don't get reviewed or covered, but there was a noticeable drop off for me in media interest once I stopped publishing with the big five publishers.
When you say that you knew this executive who was high up at Amazon, how did you have that connection in the first place?
I think he friended me on Facebook, and I was in New York, and he was inviting some people out to dinner, and I joined them. I think that's how it worked. I don't even remember exactly, but it was an internet connection. He liked some of my earlier books, and he was looking to add some writers to the Amazon publishing stable, and I needed a gig, and he liked my work, and he was willing to let me do whatever I wanted. I got 5 books out of it. I mean, that's pretty good.
I mean, because in Repeat, there's actually a Neal Pollack character who makes an appearance, and at one point he says, "No one ever wants to meet me." And I was just curious if that was is that how you feel, or?
No, I personally don't feel that way, but the Neal Pollack character in Repeat was like a past version of myself. I was a reporter in Chicago. I worked for the Chicago Reader. So what I did was I incorporated into Repeat, I incorporated the kind of article I would have written when I was doing that kind of writing, but about the character in the book. So it's a little meta. You have to really know me pretty well to get the joke, but I get the joke, and I guess that's all that really matters.
Well, the when that character shows up, the Brad Cohen character, who's the main character, he says, and you mentioned this a little bit, but he says, the Neal Pollack character says, what can you tell me about my future? And he says, you're going to get a little boost when you start writing for an internet magazine called McSweeney's. Dave Egger is a writer who will be more famous by his 30th birthday than you'll ever be in your lifetime. Will publish your first book, and that'll get your career going for real. Is there anything more to say? That sounds like an interesting story.
That's what happened. I was a newspaper reporter in Chicago, and I was writing these little parodies of magazine articles and reading them at spoken word nights, at art galleries and bars or whatever. Then there's a lively spoken word scene in Chicago at the time, and I didn't really intend to publish them anywhere. Maybe I'd publish 1 or 2 in a zine here or there. I knew. I'd known Dave Eggers a little bit in college. He was friends with someone who I went to college with. and I got an email from another friend of mine saying that really forwarded me an email that Dave Eggers has sent out saying I'm starting this new magazine called McSweeney's. At the time, Dave Eggers was kind of a rising star in New York publishing. I think he was working for Esquire. And if you have any material for the magazine, I'd love to take a look at it. So I packaged together a bunch of these pieces that I've been writing and sent them to him. And he liked them, and he put them together, and they became the first article in the first ever issue of McSweeney's, which, at the time was a huge publishing phenomenon. It's still going on, and it's still doing well for what it does. But at that moment, there was a moment where it was like the it thing in New York publishing, and then he started a website, and I started writing for the website, and I went to a party in New York, and it was really happening, especially for a literary party. I mean, there were lots of people there. There was a lot of buzz around it, reporters milling about. And it was quite exciting. And so when Eggers told me that he wanted to start a publishing company, somehow we came up with this idea for this character, the greatest living American writer, who is a parody of literary lions and a pompous magazine journalists making fun of Norman Mailer and Gore Vidal and whatnot. And so we put this book together called the Neal Pollack Anthology of American Literature. And I finished it in May of 2000, and by September of 2000, it was out, and it was a full-page review in the New York Times book review, and it was profiled in Men's Journal. I was named the Hot Writer of the Year by Rolling Stone magazine. It was crazy, and suddenly, like there you go. Suddenly, I was a relatively famous writer. It was incredible.
And was The Daily Show, was that around that same time?
The Daily Show came a few years later, after my novel Nevermind the Pollacks, which is like a rock and roll satire of rock journalism, basically. Very obscure topic, really, when it comes to people who are really into rock journalism are really into it, but it's not that many. And I was touring around with a rock band, and that's when I was on The Daily Show. But it was that sort of same era of my career, sort of that I guess I call it my famous writer period. I had a few years there, and that's no longer extant, but it got me going, and so that for some random person on a train to predict that for a guy, it's absurd. Like it is like literally the most absurd writer's origin story that you can possibly imagine. It doesn't happen. It's never happened to anyone else, and that way, and it never will. It was a time and a place and a series of circumstances, and it's just how it went down.
I mean, there was this interview you gave that I read. I can't remember where. Was it like the AV Club or something, where you were sort of saying that you got all this, like as much publicity as an author could ever, reasonably expect to get, and it didn't necessarily translate into sales. That
no,
people think that maybe think publicity can do more for you than it actually does most of the time.
I don't know. I mean, it just didn't. Things just didn't quite go exactly like I expected. Right. I got a lot of hype and not a lot of sales. There was not I had good publicity and maybe not as good marketing support. There were a couple of books I published there that I feel like could have been much bigger sellers than they were, but it just didn't happen. I don't know. I don't know what else to say other than I had a lot of fun and I did a lot of interviews, but I just didn't sell a ton of books. I had books that sold, in the low five figures. I know there are a lot of writers who would love to have a book that sold 10,000 copies. Even now, I'm excited if a book of mine sells that many. I mean, that's a lot, but it's not a ton, and it's not a living.
You were also, for a while, you were the editor, I think, of a marijuana magazine. And...
No, I was a correspondent for a publication called The Cannabist, which was a marijuana newspaper, online marijuana newspaper published by the Denver Post. And that's something that I discuss in this new book that I put out this year. Actually, came out in June, called Pothead It's a memoir of my adventures in marijuana.
Yeah, no, I'd like to read that. That sounds interesting. But there are a couple marijuana references in these two books I read I wanted to ask you about. So in Keep Mars Weird, it's mentioned in passing that in the future, marijuana is used as the ultimate battlefield analgesic. And then in Repeat, it says, quote, "There's even this one strain that they've developed in Amsterdam that if you ingest enough of it, usually in liquid form, it can create these incredible lucid dream states that seem to go on forever." And I was just curious if that's just total fiction or does any of that have any basis in reality?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, to some extent. I mean, there's this idea that marijuana is like a wonder drug, right? That it can help you focus, it can help you relax, it can heal your wounds. There's the sort of marijuana wellness industry. I mean, a lot of this was kind of cruising along, but everything got stopped in its tracks by COVID. But that sort of marijuana wellness was kind of cruising along. You're talking about an environment where people in Silicon Valley were microdosing LSD to help with their productivity, right? So I'm kind of making fun of that. The idea that like these recreational drugs are somehow medicinal is something that I wanted to believe, but it's also an idea that's kind of absurd.
So this thing about the lucid dreams, that's just fiction.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, if you take enough weed, sometimes you can have hallucinations, right? Sometimes you might have a bit of a. There's nothing lucid about it.
So you said Pothead, it came out like a couple months ago or something?
In June, yeah.
What sort of responses have you been getting to it?
Not much. Honestly,
it's sort of been overshadowed, I guess, by
there's some other stuff going on. I don't know if you were aware of that. I published an article in the New York Times editorial page in 2018 about marijuana addiction, and this is an outgrowth of that. So I get I hear from people from time to time talking about how I sort of how should I put it? Told their story or helped call attention to a problem, the problem of marijuana addiction that other people had not, and people who suspect that they have a problem. So I hear from people from time to time asking me for advice, references towards to 12-step groups or rehab or whatnot. So that's gratifying if I can help someone else or give them a sense of hope that they're not alone in believing that they have a problem, because there's a lot in our culture that says that marijuana is good for you or that it's harmless, and even more harmless than something like alcohol, certainly more harmless than harder drugs. And so when people say they have a problem with marijuana, a lot of times society poo-poos them, refuses to believe them, dismisses their addiction. And, my book, while not I wouldn't call it a scared straight narrative or even a warning necessarily, because I do kind of escape the worst consequences of addiction. I think it's a counter narrative to what marijuana lovers and what the marijuana industry puts out.
I mean, when you're talking about like all the the pandemic and all the unrest and everything, it was kind of an interesting experience reading Keep Mars Weird against this background, because there is this whole plot of the revolutionaries causing destruction and the the corporation trying to clamp down on them and everything. Like, did you do you see a lot of parallels between your book and what's been happening?
Yeah, I mean, Keep Mars Weird makes fun of lots of different things, right? Including the radical left, and their sort of revolutionary fervor, right? Which is just another source of societal misery. The corporation causes societal misery. The people who are fighting the corporations causes misery. The government causes misery. Everyone causes misery for everyone else. And, really, like at the end of the day, the individual suffers, and we all just want to be left alone to be free to do our thing. Anyone with these sort of I hate to use the word millennial, but these millennialist visions of a better world, they never quite turn out like we think they're going to, right? It's the same thing goes for COVID right now. You got people who are trying to save society from the virus, and then you got people who are trying to open up society to save the economy for the virus, and it's all everyone's vision is destructive in one way or another, right? And we're all just kind of getting battered around like balls in a bingo shaker.
Well, but I mean, the main character in the book, Jordan, at the end seems to sort of decide that the sort of universal basic income kind of system that they have on Earth in this future is sort of the way to go, or closer to the way to go. So,
it's the easiest way to go. It's kind of a boring way to go, but it is a way to go. I don't really endorse any system or any solution, because I think they all have their pluses and minuses. Rampant unregulated capitalism certainly has its flaws, as does sort of this sort of soft socialism that is offered on Earth. It does provide comfort, but it also is kind of there's no real culture, and it's kind of bland and boring. And sort of the sort of revolutionary leftism that's also extant on Mars creates it's kind of fun and exciting, but it also can create its own brand of misery, right? So no one approach, I think, is gonna create happiness, and that's that chaos that we're constantly living in. Is that's what the book satirizes. I don't have a preferred outcome. I'm just trying to get through the day.
Yeah. Well, so you want to talk about some other projects that you've have recently? Are you are writing? I think maybe you started, but you're at least writing for a website called Book and Film Globe.
Yeah, I'm the editor in chief of a pop culture website called Book and Film Globe. bookandfilmglobe.com. We cover the publishing industry, movies and streaming TV, mostly reviews, but also some original reporting, interviews with writers and filmmakers and whatnot. I've been doing that for a couple of years, full time this year, and part time before that. And that's my main gig. I do continue to write this sort of some occasional greatest living American writer satire pieces, and I'm starting production on a new novel. My goal is to do it start on Sunday, because I like to write along for National Novel Writing Month, even though that tends to be a project, something that people who haven't published before do. I still like to. It's a nice motivator for me, and it's time. I'm feeling kind of the pandemic has left me kind of feeling creatively stagnant, and I just need to get going again.
There's a line in Repeat where the main character, Brad Cohen, says he didn't like TV except for Mad Men and occasionally 30 Rock. Is that how you feel at all?
No. I watch lots of TV. I like all kinds of TV. I watch highbrow stuff. I watch crappy. I watch reality TV. I watch game shows. I watch all kinds of stuff. I mean, I run a pop culture website, so I kind of have to voraciously consume as much pop culture as I can.
Did you said do you do interviews personally? Like, have you interviewed anyone you were excited to talk to recently?
No, not really.
Okay.
No, I did mostly. I publish interviews that other people do and edit them, but I did interview the woman who published Woody Allen's new memoir. That was kind of at the beginning of the pandemic. That was kind of an interesting. She was an interesting character. She's a French woman who was married to he's deceased now, married to a guy who was published Henry Miller in the U.S. when he was being censored, and a bunch of other different writers who were being subject to censorship at the time. And so she sort of considered publishing Woody Allen's memoir on that same level, and I thought that was very, very interesting interview. I think that was the last one that I personally conducted. I don't like doing them so much because I have to transcribe. That's just a lot of work. I don't know. Maybe I'm lazy. I don't know. I spent a long time transcribing interviews as a reporter, and it's the worst part of the job.
Yeah, there are speech recognition programs. I haven't actually used any of them, but I've had guests tell me that some of them are actually pretty good now.
You gotta pay for the good ones, but I've spent a lot of time in the last few months, like consuming the culture of COVID-19 and writing articles that are critical of sort of Zoom culture and these stupid, celebrity table readings that keep popping up on Zoom. Those drive me crazy. Making fun of Tiger King and various other things that have popped up during the pandemic. Writing a lot about closure of movie theaters. That's something that's been sort of a cause celeb of mine, because I find that the sort of attack on movie theaters has been tragic, really. What's happened to the theater industry? The fact that they keep promising us all these blockbuster films and then yanking them away from us at the last second. It's frustrating.
I'll definitely check out that interview you did with the editor, because if people don't know the story, basically this a major publisher was going to publish Woody Allen's memoir, and then they kind of had a revolt among the staff and ended up dropping it, and which I thought was really setting a bad precedent for publishing.
Agreed.
And so,
because I know Woody Allen's a controversial figure, but that doesn't, but it kind of mirrored what would happen at the New York Times when, they felt unsafe. The publishers felt, the people who worked for the publishing house felt unsafe. And it was sort of an in-house censorship move. So this independent publisher picked it up, and it sold really, really well worldwide, but also in the U.S. because Woody Allen still has his fans,
Yeah. So was there anything that she said that sort of sticks out in your mind when you talk to her?
Well, she considered what happened to Woody Allen at his original publishing house to be censorship. And I have to say, I agree with her. I think that it wasn't government censorship, but it was kind of like a soft internal censorship. And that's something that has been, that is a theme in publishing. I think there's a way to publish a more diverse slate of authors and to, diversify the editorial staffs and the business staffs of publishing houses without canceling people who the new crew might find distasteful. It's just a bizarre. You can have both. You can have both flavors of ice cream.
Yeah. I always want to just I want to be able to make the decision myself, what books I read, rather than having other people make those decisions for me.
Yeah, I'm against censorship in all its forms, and I think that there's a censorial attitude on the cultural left that is dangerous, as dangerous as any censorial attitude on the cultural right is or has been. You should not restrict speech, and that's something that we stand up for pretty strongly at the site. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So then also, you're doing a thing called Extra Credit with your son. You want to tell us about that? That is not being. We're not making that anymore. But my teenage son Elijah and I had. It was pretty recent though, wasn't it? It was in the last 5 years. Okay. It was 2017, I think, actually. But we had a podcast on Audible when Audible was doing kind of original produced podcasts, and it was kind of like a hipster homeschooling project. Basically, he and I traveled around, and I would teach him about various things, and we'd interview people and, have adventures and sort of wacky father-son interactions. It was really fun and really cool. It was a lot of work. And it was my main work for a couple of years there. And when that burned out, I switched gears, and now I'm editing this cultural website. So you can still find that. I don't know exactly where that's available. I think it's on the iTunes store. And maybe at Audible. It's definitely on Audible. I found it's on Audible, and we did 2 seasons, 20 episodes, and had a lot of fun. And hopefully, hopefully my son enjoyed it. I don't know. It's hard to tell. He's a teenager. He doesn't want to admit like any real enthusiasm for anything, you know.
Did you have any sort of production team for that, or were you doing it?
Yeah, we hired a producer, independent radio producer who I was friends with in Austin, and then we worked with Audible. Eric Newsom and Eva Wolchover specifically were, you know, two very experienced podcast producers who sort of saw the show through and made sure that it, you know, everything went smoothly. And we had a budget. We had a production budget. Those were the days when you had a production budget to travel around and make a podcast. And I think maybe some people still do, but it ran out. Audible changed its concept. They had some new management, and you know, the show just kind of went away.
Well, but there's still 2 seasons of, I think
they're available. Yeah, it went away in terms of like it was canceled. You know, it's not like they're not still available. And yeah, you can listen to them, and there's sort of just a it's sort of a creative way of doing homeschooling. It really, like, I mean, there were some of the episodes maybe were better than others, but you know, I think it's a good example of like something productive you can do with your teenager. It was a creative project that I got to do with my son, and you know, I'll always have that. And it was really cool and a really, really crazy adventure for both of us.
Yeah, no, I haven't listened to it, but I was just looking at the description and stuff. It sounded really cool. And of course, obviously, I'm interested in podcasts, you know, anything related to podcasts.
Yeah, well, of course, right. But it was different than this. Like, we did some interviews, but there was a lot of like traveling and like, you know, sort of NPR style scene setting, and like, you know, it wasn't just like getting on the horn with people who we thought were interesting. I mean, in retrospect, that probably would have been a lot easier and cheaper to do, but
it's definitely cheap, yeah.
It was less expensive. It would have been less expensive, but we wanted to try something kind of crazy and creative, and Audible was supportive of, and we traveled all over the country. We never went abroad, but you know, I think there were plans to do that when for a third season, when things just kind of changed at Audible, and so we weren't able to do that.
Yeah. Well, no, it sounds really cool. And yeah, I mean, obviously you have like so many things, you know, so many projects and things that you've been doing. I've had a lot of interesting media adventures. Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So we're pretty much out of time. Do you have any final thoughts or any other projects you want to, if we haven't mentioned them all, that you want to let people know about?
I don't know. I don't think there's much else. I mean, I could continue to try to get people to go to Spotify and download songs from my band, the Neal Pollack Invasion. There's also the Neal Pollack Quintet. I have an indie music career as well. So sure, if you have found me deeply compelling during this hour, then yeah, go ahead and check out my tunes.
And you have another science fiction novel you said you're working on?
I mean, in my mind. So that means it'll probably be done.
That means it could be done in 3 months or something, right?
Oh, it'll absolutely be done in 3 months. Once I start, I won't stop, and I'll just do it. And then I don't know who's going to publish it, or when, or if, or you know why. But you know, at some point, it'll see the light of day, and then you'll get to, you know, read my cranky satirical thoughts about the COVID-19 era.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to it because, you know, as I said, like I just laughed so much reading these 2 books. So, you know, definitely
I guess either, you know, were you drunk? I mean, I don't, but that, I mean, honestly, like I'm very flattered that you say that, because like, you know, these books, like I've said, were released in sort of a kind of an odd ecosystem. And so like, I never know who's seeing them or when or how. Just the idea that like I would even be considered a sci-fi writer is so cool to me and so flattering that you know, I was very excited to do this interview because you know, it's something that I've always wanted to be, and I guess I am now.
Yeah, no, yeah. If you've been on this show, then you're the real deal. That's how I see it. And no,
all right, I'm the real deal. Great.
I was, you know, like especially like I was reading the first chapter, you know, the first section of Repeat, and I was just laughing so much. My girlfriend finally like turned to me and she's like, I feel jealous of this book, you know, that it's making you laugh so much. So
yeah, I think if you guys were to meet me in person, and since you guys live in Austin, probably someday you will, she would be very jealous for long.
Well, no, like as I've, you know, as I said, we moved here and we haven't gotten really a chance to meet anyone. So I would definitely like to meet you sometime.
Hey man, I mean, look, I'm up for meeting whenever. I'm ready to party, but I understand that people are still still up for keeping their distance. But if you want to go grab a brew sometime, just let me know.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll definitely be in touch
when the plague is over.
Yeah. But yeah, so why don't we wrap this this up there then? So we've been speaking with Neal Pollack about his books Repeat and Keep Mars Weird. So Neal, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Neal Pollack for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.